Hello and welcome to our £200 shoe test. So £200 is quite a lot of money to spend on a pair of shoes. So what are the features we are looking for at this price point?
So typically when you're spending £200, you're right, it's a pretty considered purchase, but you are a couple of rungs down from those sort of £300 shoes that we see an awful lot of these days now.
Yeah, so top end race shoes do tend to be sort of pretty expensive now, don't they?
I know. I mean, that is becoming, a serious investment. So going down just a couple of steps on the ladder, you get an awful lot of those features, but just with some small adjustments that are able to bring the price in that little bit lower. So typically at £200, you are getting a third-party closure system. All three pairs in front of me have BOA dials, and that is what you're seeing pretty much across the board. There are a couple of exceptions, which we haven't looked at. And you're generally getting a carbon composite sole, although some brands are still offering a nylon sole that's injected with carbon, which will generally reduce the price, but it's just not quite as stiff. I mean, if you want a bit of flex, that could actually be a good thing. I mean, the weight does vary pretty much across at this kind of price point. You're seeing quite a few sort of differences between the models. But I always think it's worth just bearing in mind that generally you're only ever going to be saving 100 grams max. And I think, in a shoe, fit is absolutely paramount, isn't it? For that 100 grams, that's probably a small amount of water in your bottle. So I would always prioritise fit and always do try before you buy, because everyone's feet are different. And yeah, comfort is the number one concern.
So for this test, we called in 6 pairs of shoes to cover all the bases. So we had a set from Giant called the Giant Surge. We've got Bontrager Velocis. We've got the Shimano RC7. These are Fizik's R4 Overcurve Tempo. I think that's the term.
Yep.
Then we also had Sidi's Genius 10. And finally, and by no means least, we had the Giro Trans BOA. So 6 pairs. Now, for the sake of time, and also because of part of the test, we work out that some are often better than others. We narrowed it down to 3 pairs to talk about today. So we have, from left to right, we've got the Fizik R4 Tempo Overcurve, or the Overcurve Tempo, the Bontrager Velocis, and we've got Shimano's RC7. So these are our top picks. So what we're going to do, just going to talk about them now.
So we've reviewed each pair in detail online. So all 6 pairs you'll find a long form review, and obviously we'll talk about some of the key features with these 3, but there is again more information on the Cycling Weekly website. So we're going to run through these shoes and talk about specific features and how each model compares. So I suppose number 1, we want to look at the closure system. As you can see, all 3 have a BOA dial. However, they do have different BOA dials.
So the one that Shimano uses is BOA's LP6. Now this only pulls it tight, so you can only dial that in, and if you want to actually loosen that retention, you actually have to pop it up, and then that pulls it out completely, which is a slightly different system to what you find on the other 2, which is the IP2 system. Now, it's all really like sort of cool sounding stuff, isn't it? But the main thing on here that you'll find is that the dial works in 2 ways. So you can either tighten in increments, or you can loosen in increments as well. So it means that from a fine-tuned fit point of view, these are a slightly better system if you like to really fiddle with your shoes, like at the end of a ride, you want to tighten them up, or your feet have swollen, so you want to loosen them off, then they kind of can do that. The good thing about these ones as well is you can then, for taking the shoe off, you can just pop it out and it will obviously come out completely. So there is that ability still with this style of retention. But overall, they use the same type of lace. So this is the same BOA lace on all of these. And the great thing with these, even though they're super thin, they're so strong, aren't they?
Oh yeah, have you ever broken one?
Long time ago.
Okay, so
yeah, when they first came out, I used to have to repair these all the time in my old job in the bike shop. But the new ones, they're so reliable now. And the other good thing as well is if you do have a problem, the IP2s just use a little tool here, and you can take off that whole dial, and then you can either replace individual parts or the whole thing. But these ones are really cool because these are a cartridge. So you can just basically lever off this whole unit, chuck it away, and put a new one in. So they are not something that if they break, that means the end of the shoe. So that is the nice thing about all of these.
Which is well worth bearing in mind. I think that would be a real shame if someone thought, you know, I've got to replace my shoe now that the bow is broken. If that does happen.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the other distinctions is on the RC7s, you have got 2 dials, whereas Bontrager has gone for Velcro at the front, which will give you a bit. I mean, I've never found Velcro to make a huge difference.
See, that's what I found, because I tested the Bontragers myself, and one of the things I mentioned in my review is it doesn't need that Velcro bit, and I find a lot of shoes there, you know, you get a little bit of difference in terms of the tension over your toes, but it doesn't make a lot of difference really, unless you've got a super low volume foot. You know, you hardly ever touch it. Yeah, and so they could almost make the shoe even lighter by taking away that. And that's what Fizik have done here. It's like, you can see that there's no other retention system on that. It just has that one BOA dial.
As we mentioned at the very start of this video, fit is absolutely paramount, regardless how much you are spending on your cycling shoes. I personally tested the Shimano RC7s. I suppose it would be fair to say I've got kind of spade-like feet. It's a fair description. I've generally got wider feet at the front and quite narrow ankles, which sometimes makes it actually a little bit hard to find shoes that fit perfectly. The RC7s I found incredible, so I just put them on and they felt great from the start. So I suppose it would be fair then to say that the Shimanos would work for someone that has a slightly wider foot. That would be my sort of takeaway on those. But yeah, for me, they were great. And they've got a really good kind of grip at the ankles. Quite a lot of padding there, which I think when you start going up through the ranks, you know, if you're spending kind of £300, you generally, that padding diminishes slightly. I actually quite liked it. I felt quite secure on my ankle. When I got out of we do a Cycling Weekly lunchtime ride. I went for a town sign sprint and, you know, they felt pretty decent. Yet to get to race season proper, so I haven't tried them in anger, but yeah, certainly in that kind of instance they held on pretty well and there was kind of no slipping, so that for me was bang on.
So I've got the other 2 sets of shoes on here, of the Bontragers and the Fiziks. And we'll go to the Fiziks first of all. Now, I've got to give you context as well. My feet are relatively medium in terms of width, with a few extraneous bony bits sort of sticking out, and about a mid-volume sort of foot as well, you know, and quite a high arch. That's one thing as well. And the Fiziks actually are pretty wide. So Fiziks of the past, I always had a few issues in terms of they were either a little bit too narrow or they had a couple of little bits which gave me hot spots. But the R4s are actually a really, really decent fit. So I'm not sure if they've actually changed the last of like the actual sort of like the sole and the upper here. But I found no issues at all in terms of toe bucks, and there's plenty of space to actually wiggle my toes as well, which is always good. The other thing as well is sometimes you know, people have to size up with their cycling shoes, and I do that with a lot of pairs of shoes, but the Fiziks were pretty much bang on. So like everything though, and you know, and you'll be the first one to say it as well, you want to try a pair of shoes on first of all. So if you can find a shop that sells these, then go and try them on first of all, because we've all got different feet. But the fit was pretty damn good. They hold on to the foot really well. So even though it's only got this one dial, it holds the whole foot almost like a nice secure slipper really. And the heel as well. So theirs is cut out a little bit more. It's still quite padded, but it's got a little bit of gripper inside here as well. And again, that sort of like holds on really, really nicely. There's a bit of slippage, but not a huge amount on there. In terms of the tongue's quite thin. So first of all, you sort of go, oh, it's not gonna be that comfy, especially with the one like lace, but it works. They've got a nice deep split in the top. So again, I've got a bit of a bony bit which goes up to my ankle, and I can sometimes find it really, really painful with some tongues, but that one actually had no problem at all. Bontragers, I honestly have to say that this is a fit unlike any others. These were probably one of the most comfortable pairs of shoes I've ever tried. So they fitted absolutely spot on, again for me, but the toe box had plenty of space in there, plenty of wiggle room, so I didn't feel that my toes got numb. There was no hot spots, and the width was pretty much bang on here. So it's not the widest of shoes, because obviously I could feel the outside, but it was a fairly good neutral fit on there. It also tapers really nicely towards the ankle and towards the heel. And here you can see it's a slightly deeper heel cup. So, and because it's quite nicely shaped as well, it really does hold your heel in place. And a bit like a normal trainer, it's actually quite softly and quite thickly padded as well. So it's actually quite nice. And the one noticeable thing as well, which I really benefited from, I should say, is the tongue. That is one of the thickest, softest tongues I've tried in a long time.
I mean, it's notably thicker than the other two we've got.
Yeah, most of them, and especially at this point where like weight comes into it as well, a lot of brands go for a very thin tongue with a bit of padding in the middle, and sometimes that can work. Sometimes if they don't get the cut right, it's really painful to start off with. But this, as you can see, is like super thick, and that made this shoe just straight from the box, like sort of went, oh yeah, this fits perfectly. Again, they don't need the Velcro there, that can go. Okay, so Bontrager, get rid of it. But the rest of it was pretty decent, so I was very happy with that.
The other thing on these is the upper. I absolutely loved. So they've used a synthetic leather upper. It's got this really cool, I don't know if you can see it from there, it's just this amazing kind of oil slick sort of aesthetic that, I mean, for me it felt like a really top end shoe. There is an awful lot of perforations around the front. And one thing I noticed was that even wearing overshoes, I could feel the draft.
Right, yeah, that's the big thing, isn't it?
I don't envisage myself having cold feet most of the time, but I sort of, on really kind of breezy winter rides, I'd be inclined to actually use one of those kind of toe warmers you get, and then put overshoes over the top. It's not really so much a criticism in that I think it will really come into its own in summer, but I'd certainly noticed it riding in winter.
Whereas my feet go cold and numb straight away, so it doesn't really matter what I wear, really. They're going to get cold. So what was the sole like on the Shimanos?
Again, I mean, the sole really impressed me. Again, I was really happy with this. It's mega stiff. Like it is like 2 rungs down when compared to Shimano's kind of top end RC9 shoe.
But it's like,
it's a bit of it's still like,
stiff.
They're both stiff.
Yeah.
So there's absolutely no complaints there whatsoever. The other pretty cool thing is you get Shimano's Dynalast sole. So there's an awful lot of kind of marketing garble out there, but I don't believe this is it. So they have optimized the toe spring section, the idea being to reduce that kind of inefficiency in the upstroke. I mean, it's pretty hard to sort of actually see that in play unless you're actually on a watt bike trying to make your perfect peanut. Most people aren't doing that most of the time, but I did feel just that these were really springy, and I felt really good pedaling in these. So yeah, for me, really strong, really stiff, and very efficient as well.
Whereas if you're not all about racing and not all about that out and out ruthless stiffness, the other two here have got a slight edge. So at first glance, when you sort of get these in the shop and you give them a quick flex, you realise there is actually a bit of flex in the toe area and in the heel area of these shoes. Now, that's not necessarily a negative thing, because if you'd like to do longer rides or rides where you're not going absolutely ham all the time, what that little bit of flex gives you is it reduces the fatigue in your foot. So it makes it a little bit more of a comfortable shoe to have for most of the time, and that works for a lot of people. So there is a little bit of flex in these, and the same goes with the Fiziks as well. But the other big difference as well between them all is what they're made from. So the one thing that we've got here is we've got 3 basically slightly different types of material. So what we're talking about here is these are all carbon soles. So when we say carbon soles, we mean that they've got carbon in them. But the other big thing that you do find though is when you have certain brands using their different materials, it makes the sole a bit thicker. So obviously if we then look to the difference in terms of thickness of the soles, the Fizik and the Shimano are actually quite a thick sole. So the height from this point here to this point here, so the stack height of these soles is thicker than theirs on the Bontrager. So the Bontrager's got a pretty super thin sole unit on here. So that's one other thing to think about. So efficiency comes into play here as well. So if we think about biomechanical efficiency, thinner the sole, closer your foot can get to the pedal axle, does make a difference in very small amounts here. So the stiffness,
is a marginal gain
this is
squad,
it.
yeah.
So the flexibility on here, even though it's thinner, means that it's probably not going to be as efficient as the sole on this, which is thicker, but it's a way stiffer sole. So from an efficiency point of view, the Shimano's pretty much have got it in the bag really from that point of view.
There is one last thing to consider, and it will interest the weight weenies out there. So we did weigh each of these shoes. I tested the RC7s in a size 40, and they came in at 234 grams per shoe.
Yeah, and Bontragers and the Fiziks are in my size. Obviously, I'm slightly bigger, so it's size 45. The Fiziks came in at 260 grams on average per shoe, whereas the Bontragers were 231 grams per shoe for a size 45. So these are actually super light. It was noticeably light compared to the others in those sizes.
So as with any head-to-head, there really can only be one winner. In this case, it was Shimano's RC7s. It was mainly the stiffness of the sole that really swung it there. They feel a lot like some of the top-end shoes, and for that reason, they are our winner. The Bontragers, however, came in really, really close. They are a little bit more flexy, which is the reason they didn't take the star prize. However, for some people, that will be a really positive thing, and some people will prefer that, so it is well worth considering these. The Fiziks, even more so there was just that even more flex we found than the Bontragers when comparing head to head. And so they kind of take that third step on the podium. And it is also worth noting that they are quite a bit heavier than the other two pairs on test.
So there you have it, our £200 shoe test. If you've got any other products you'd like to see us test, please put it in the comments section below. And don't forget to like and subscribe. And more importantly, click on that notification bell to keep up with our latest releases. But until then, we'll see you soon.